The night Hannah Zimmerman left her baby on the church steps was the coldest night of 1876, a fact that would haunt her long after the frost melted from the Colorado mountains. Her fingers trembled not from the biting wind, but from the weight of what she was about to do, abandon the only thing she had ever truly loved. Hannah pulled the tattered blanket tighter around 6-month-old Emma, whose cherub face remained peaceful in sleep, unaware of her mother's desperate decision. The rough wool of the blanket scratched against Hannah's chapped hands as she placed the small bundle on the wooden steps of Silverton's only church. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid night air. "I can't watch you starve." The words caught in her throat, choking her with their finality. 3 days without food had hollowed Hannah's cheeks and weakened her resolve. The mining town that had promised so much had delivered nothing but hardship after her husband's death in the silver mines 4 months earlier. No one would hire a woman with a baby, and her meager savings had dwindled to nothing. Hannah pressed her lips to Emma's forehead one last time, memorizing the sweet scent of her child. Then she forced herself to turn away, each step down the snow-covered street more painful than the last. She hadn't gone more than 20 paces when the sound of boots crunching through snow made her freeze. Hannah didn't turn around, couldn't bear to face judgment from whoever had witnessed her shame. "Madam," called a deep voice, steady and clear in the still night, "you forgot something." Hannah's heart plummeted. She slowly turned to see a tall figure silhouetted in the moonlight, her bundled baby cradled in his arms. "She's not forgotten," Hannah said, her voice barely audible. "She's better off here. Someone will find her come morning." The man stepped closer, and the moonlight revealed a weather-beaten face partially hidden beneath the brim of a cowboy hat. He couldn't have been more than 30, with eyes that seemed to see right through her desperate lie. "In this cold?" he asked, his tone gentle but firm. "She wouldn't make it till dawn." Hannah's legs gave out beneath her and she sank to her knees in the snow. The cold seeped through her thin dress, but she hardly noticed. "I have nothing to feed her," she admitted, the words torn from her very soul. "Nothing left to give." The stranger shifted Emma to one arm and extended his other hand toward Hannah. "My name is Blake Barton. I've got a ranch just outside town with plenty of food and warm beds. Leave nothing behind. I'll feed you both." Hannah stared at his outstretched hand, suspicion warring with desperation. "Why would you help us? You don't know me." Blake's expression softened. "My mother was left on church steps not unlike these. She was lucky, found by good people before the cold took her. Not everyone gets that chance." The baby stirred in his arms, and Hannah's maternal instinct pulled her to her feet. She reached for Emma, and Blake returned the child without hesitation. "I don't accept charity," Hannah said, though she held Emma close, already unable to imagine walking away again. "Then consider it a job offer," Blake replied. "My housekeeper left last month. Place could use a woman's touch and I could use the help." Hannah searched his face for any sign of deception and found only earnestness. "I don't know the first thing about ranching." "But you know about hard work," he said, nodding toward the calluses on her hands. "That's all I'm asking for." Emma whimpered, the sound cutting through Hannah's indecision like a knife. One night of warmth, one meal, that was all she needed to convince herself this wasn't a mistake. "One night," she agreed finally. "We'll stay one night." Blake nodded, respecting her caution. "My wagon's hitched outside the general store. Let's get you both out of this cold." Hannah followed him through the deserted streets, wondering if she was making another terrible mistake or finding her salvation. Either way, Emma would be warm tonight, and for that alone, Hannah would have followed the stranger into the wilderness itself. The journey to Blake's ranch took nearly an hour, the wagon creaking over frozen ruts in the road. Hannah sat with Emma bundled against her chest, the borrowed blanket from Blake wrapped around them both. The cowboy drove in silence, occasionally glancing at his passengers, but offering no conversation that might make Hannah uncomfortable. As they crested a hill, the Barton ranch appeared below them, a sturdy 2-story house with a wide porch. several outbuildings and corrals that stretched into the darkness. Lanterns burned in the windows, casting a welcoming glow across the snowy yard. "Home," Blake said simply as he guided the horses toward the house. An older man emerged from one of the outbuildings as they approached, his gray hair visible beneath a weathered hat. "You're back late, Blake," he called, then stopped short when he noticed Hannah and the baby. "And with company." "Hank, this is Hannah and Emma," Blake said as he brought the wagon to a stop. "They'll be staying with us. Hannah, this is Hank Miller, my foreman." Hannah nodded cautiously, still uncertain of her place in this strange arrangement. Hank's weathered face broke into a kind smile. "About time we had a woman's touch around here. Place has gone to seed since Martha left." Blake helped Hannah down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady as he supported her weight. Emma had fallen asleep again, oblivious to the tension in her mother's body. "Let's get you settled," Blake said, leading Hannah toward the house. "There's stew on the stove that should still be warm." The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly well-appointed, not lavish, but comfortable, with solid furniture and a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. The heat hit Hannah like an embrace as they stepped inside, reminding her how long it had been since she'd been properly warm. "Kitchen's through there," Blake said, pointing to an archway. "Bedroom's upstairs. You can have the one at the end of the hall. It gets the morning sun." Hannah stood awkwardly in the center of the room, Emma clutched to her chest. "Mr. Barton, Blake," he corrected. "Blake," she amended. "I need to understand what you're expecting from me." Her chin lifted slightly. "From us." Blake removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that curled slightly at his temples. "I expect you to eat, get some rest, and consider staying on as my housekeeper. Room and board plus wages. Nothing more than that." Relief washed over Hannah, though she remained guarded. "And if I decide to leave tomorrow?" "Then I'll take you wherever you want to go," he replied evenly. "But I hope you'll stay. Place needs someone to look after it, and you and your daughter need somewhere safe." Before Hannah could respond, Emma began to fuss, her small face scrunching with hunger. Panic flashed across Hannah's features. "She's hungry," she said unnecessarily, bouncing the baby gently. "I haven't been able to feed her properly for days." Blake moved toward the kitchen. "Martha kept some goat's milk in the pantry for baking. Would that work?" Hannah followed him, hope flickering to life. "Yes, if you have a way to warm it." While Blake stoked the kitchen stove and found a small pot for the milk, Hannah sank into a chair at the table, exhaustion washing over her. She unwrapped Emma, checking her for any sign of illness or discomfort. Despite everything, the baby seemed resilient, her blue eyes curious as she took in the unfamiliar surroundings. "She looks like you," Blake observed as he worked. Same determined expression. Hannah managed a small smile. "Her father would say she got her stubbornness from me." "Your husband?" Blake asked quietly. "He died in a cave-in at the Silver Bell mine," Hannah replied, the words still painful months later. "We'd only been in Silverton for 2 weeks." Blake nodded, saying nothing but somehow conveying understanding in his silence. He tested the warmed milk on his wrist before handing the small cup to Hannah. "I'll give you some privacy," he said, moving toward the door. "There's stew in that pot when you're ready. I need to help Hank with the evening chores, but I'll be back to check on you." When he was gone, Hannah carefully fed Emma, who drank greedily. For the first time in weeks, Hannah allowed herself to breathe, to feel something other than desperation. "One night," she whispered to Emma, who gazed back with trusting eyes. "We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." But as the warmth of the kitchen wrapped around her and her daughter's belly filled for the first time in days, Hannah already knew that leaving would be harder than she had imagined. The morning sun streamed through the window of the guest bedroom, waking Hannah from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. For a moment, she was disoriented, the comfortable bed and warm quilt unfamiliar after weeks of sleeping on a thin pallet in her rented room above the laundry. Emma stirred beside her in the makeshift crib Blake had fashioned from a drawer, her tiny fists stretching toward the ceiling. Hannah reached for her daughter, bringing her into the warmth of the bed. "Good morning, little one," she whispered, studying Emma's face in the clear light. Her cheeks already looked fuller, her eyes brighter after just one night of proper feeding and warmth. A knock at the door startled Hannah. She pulled the blankets higher, suddenly aware of her disheveled appearance. "Yes, breakfast is ready when you are," came Blake's voice through the door. "No rush, there's hot water for washing up too." "Thank you," Hannah called, relief flooding her that he hadn't entered without permission. "We'll be down shortly." True to his word, Blake had left a pitcher of steaming water beside a basin on the dresser, along with a bar of soap that smelled of lavender. Hannah washed herself and Emma, then dressed in her only other dress, faded and patched, but clean. When they descended to the kitchen, Blake was frying bacon at the stove, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. He turned at their entry, and his smile was genuine. "Sleep well?" Hannah nodded, still cautious but less afraid than she had been the night before. "Better than I have in a long time, thank you." "Sit down," Blake urged, gesturing to the table already set with plates and mugs. "Coffee's hot and there's more of that goat's milk for Emma." As Hannah settled Emma in her lap and accepted the cup of coffee Blake offered, she found herself studying him openly for the first time. In daylight, she could see that his face was handsome in a rugged way, with a strong jaw partially obscured by a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes were a warm brown, crinkled at the corners from years squinting in the sun. "How long have you had this ranch?" Hannah asked, making an effort to be polite despite her natural reserve. Blake flipped the bacon in the pan. "Going on 8 years now. Started with just 20 acres and a few cattle. Built most of it myself." "It's impressive," Hannah admitted, looking around the well-constructed kitchen. "It's a good living," Blake replied modestly. "We run about 300 head of cattle now, plus some horses. Hank and a couple of seasonal hands help with the herding and breaking." "And you've never married?" Hannah asked before she could stop herself. Heat rose to her cheeks. "I'm sorry, that's not my business." Blake smiled as he transferred the bacon to a plate. "No offense taken." "And no, never married. Been too busy building something worth offering to a wife." The simple honesty in his voice made Hannah look away, uncomfortable with the implication that some women might find security attractive. She had married for love, a miner with dreams as big as the mountains that had ultimately claimed him. "What are your plans, Hannah?" Blake asked, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "If you don't stay here, I mean." Hannah shifted Emma to her other arm, buying time. "I don't have many options," she admitted finally. "I was hoping to find work in Denver, perhaps. There must be families who need household help." "There's work here," Blake said, taking the seat across from her. "Not just housekeeping. This place could use a vegetable garden come spring, maybe some chickens. Emma could grow up with fresh air and open spaces." "Mr. Barton, Blake," he corrected again, gently. "Blake," Hannah said, meeting his gaze directly. "I appreciate your kindness more than I can express, but I need to understand why you're doing this. Men don't offer homes to strange women without expecting something in return." Blake's expression grew serious. "My mother was abandoned as an infant, as I told you. The family that took her and saved her life raised her as their own. When I found you last night, it felt like I was being given a chance to pass on that kindness." He paused. "I'm not looking for a wife, Hannah, if that's your concern. Just someone to help make this house a home, and in return, you and Emma get a fresh start." Hannah wanted to believe him. After months of struggling alone, the prospect of safety and stability was almost too much to hope for. "I'll stay through the week," she decided finally. "We can see how it works for both of us." Blake nodded, accepting her caution. "Fair enough. Now eat your breakfast before it gets cold." The week passed in a blur of new routines. Hannah found the work satisfying, cooking meals, tidying the house that had clearly been neglected in the months since the previous housekeeper had left. Blake was true to his word, respectful of her privacy and generous with supplies for Emma. Hank Miller, the foreman, became an unexpected ally. The older man took to bringing Hannah wildflowers he found on his rides and telling her stories of the early days of the ranch while she cooked dinner. Boss was just a boy with big dreams when he bought this land, Hank told her one evening as he whittled a small wooden horse at the kitchen table. Everyone said he'd fail, that the soil was too poor for grazing, but Blake's stubborn, built everything you see with his own 2 hands. Hannah kneaded bread dough, letting the familiar motion soothe her. He seems like a good man. The best, Hank agreed. After his adopted mother died 3 years back, he put all his energy into this place. Works from sunup to sundown most days. Adopted mother? Hannah asked, curious despite herself. Hank nodded. The folks who found his mother raised her, and she raised him the same way, with a heart big enough to take in strays. He winked at Emma, who was propped in a cushioned basket nearby. Like you too. Hannah's hands stilled in the dough. We're not strays, Hank, we're just passing through. The old foreman's eyes twinkled. If you say so, madam, but I've noticed the boss smiling more this past week than he has in years. Hannah ignored the implication, but she couldn't ignore the way her heart had started to flutter whenever Blake entered a room. She told herself it was simply gratitude, or perhaps the natural response to being around a handsome, kind man after months of grief and solitude. On the 7th day, as Hannah was hanging laundry on the line behind the house, Blake approached from the stables. He carried something wrapped in burlap, his expression unreadable. "Morning, Hannah," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "Got a minute?" Hannah secured a sheet to the line. "Of course." Blake shifted, suddenly looking boyishly nervous. "I made something for Emma. It's not fancy, but it's better than sleeping in a drawer." He unwrapped the burlap to reveal a beautifully crafted wooden cradle, the edges sanded smooth and the rockers perfectly curved. Hannah's breath caught. "You made this," Blake nodded. "Been working on it in the evenings. The wood's cherry should last her until she needs a real bed." Tears pricked at Hannah's eyes as she ran her fingers over the polished wood. No one had given her anything since Thomas died, let alone something made with such care. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "But I know," Blake said quickly, understanding her hesitation. "You haven't decided if you're staying. Consider it a parting gift if you go, or Emma's first piece of furniture if you stay." Hannah looked up at him, really looked, and saw the hope he was trying to conceal. "Why do you want us to stay, truly?" Blake set the cradle down carefully. "Because in 1 week, you've made this house feel more like a home than it has in years. Because Emma's laugh makes even Hank smile. And because," he hesitated, then continued more softly, "because I've been alone a long time, Hannah. We all have." The honesty of his answer disarmed her. "I'm afraid," she admitted, "of depending on someone again, of losing everything again." "I can't promise nothing bad will ever happen," Blake said, stepping closer. "But I can promise you won't face it alone as long as I'm breathing." Hannah looked past him to the ranch house, solid and welcoming in the morning light. Beyond it stretched meadows and gentle hills, a world so different from the mining town that had taken her husband and nearly her hope. "1 month," she said finally. "Let's try for 1 month." Blake's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. 1 month it is. The month turned into 2, then 3. Spring came to the mountains, melting the snow and turning the meadows around the ranch a vibrant green. Hannah planted the vegetable garden Blake had suggested, with Emma crawling on a blanket nearby as she worked the soil. As the days lengthened, Hannah found herself laughing more, the weight of grief gradually lifting from her shoulders. Blake was patient, never pushing for more than friendship, but she caught him watching her sometimes with an expression that made her heart race. They developed a comfortable routine breakfast together before Blake rode out to check the cattle, dinner in the evening where they would share stories of their day. Sometimes after Emma was asleep, they would sit on the porch, watching the stars appear over the mountains. "I always dreamed of having a place like this," Hannah admitted one such evening in late May. "Thomas and I talked about saving enough to buy a small farm someday." Blake's voice was gentle. "Do you still miss him?" Hannah considered the question. "I miss the future we planned," she said honestly. But the sharpest pain has eased. Emma helps seeing him in her eyes. She's thriving here, Blake observed. So are you, Hannah nodded. I never thought I'd feel safe again after he died. And now, Blake asked, his voice carefully neutral. Hannah turned to look at him, moonlight silvering his profile. Now I'm afraid of wanting too much. Blake's hand found hers on the porch railing, his touch light enough that she could pull away if she wished. What do you want, Hannah? The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities. Hannah looked at their joined hands, at the strength in his fingers and the gentleness in his touch. Time, she answered finally. To be sure my heart is my own to give. Blake nodded, squeezing her hand once before releasing it. I've got nothing but time, Hannah Zimmerman. Summer brought cattle drives and long days when Blake was away from the ranch. Hannah found herself watching for his return, Emma in her arms as they stood on the porch at sunset. The baby would squeal with delight when Blake's horse appeared on the ridge, and Hannah couldn't deny the leap her own heart made at the sight. One sweltering July afternoon, Hannah was kneading bread when a commotion in the yard drew her attention. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped onto the porch to see Hank helping Blake dismount, blood soaking through his shirt. What happened? She gasped, rushing forward. Steer spooked and caught him with a horn, Hank explained as they half-carried Blake toward the house. Tore him up pretty good. I'm fine, Blake insisted, though his face was pale with pain. Just need to clean it up. Hannah took charge immediately, directing Hank to bring Blake to the kitchen table. She heated water and gathered clean cloths, her hands steady despite the fear clutching at her heart. Hank, check on Emma, please, she instructed. She's napping upstairs. When the foreman was gone, Hannah carefully helped Blake remove his torn shirt. The wound beneath was an angry gash along his ribs, still bleeding freely but not as deep as she had feared. You're lucky, she said, her voice trembling slightly as she began to clean the wound. A few inches higher and it might have punctured your lung. Blake watched her face as she worked. I've had worse. That's not reassuring, Hannah muttered, pressing a cloth against the cut to stop the bleeding. Her fingers traced the edges of old scars on his chest and shoulders, testament to the harsh realities of ranch life. Hannah, Blake said softly, capturing her wrist in his hand. I'm really all right, she met his eyes then, unable to hide her fear. You could have been killed. But I wasn't, he replied, his thumb stroking the inside of her wrist. I came home to you, to both of you. The simple truth in his words broke something inside Hannah, the final wall she had built around her heart. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, a gentle kiss that conveyed everything she hadn't been able to say. Blake remained perfectly still, letting her lead, responding with restrained tenderness. When Hannah pulled back, his eyes were dark with emotion. I wasn't expecting that, he said, his voice rough. Hannah's cheeks flushed, but she didn't look away. Neither was I. But I've been thinking about it for weeks. Blake smiled then, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his wound. If I'd known getting gored by a steer would get me kissed, I might have tried it sooner. Hannah shook her head, fighting a smile. Don't you dare make jokes. You scared years off my life today. Does this mean you're planning to stick around for those years? Blake asked, suddenly serious. Instead of answering, Hannah finished bandaging his wound, her touch gentle but firm. When she was done, she stood between his knees, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders. Emma and I aren't going anywhere, she said softly. This is home now. The joy that transformed Blake's face was worth every moment of uncertainty, every mile of the difficult journey that had brought her to his door that winter night. By August, Hannah and Emma had fully settled into life at the Barton Ranch. The vegetable garden flourished under Hannah's care, and she had indeed started keeping chickens, their fresh eggs a welcome addition to the table. Emma was crawling everywhere now, her happy babbling a constant soundtrack to their days. Blake courted Hannah properly, despite the fact that they lived under the same roof. He brought her wildflowers and took her on rides to see the most beautiful views of the valley. In the evenings, after Emma was asleep, they would talk for hours, learning each other's stories and dreams. Hannah told him about growing up in Pennsylvania, about meeting Thomas at a church social and falling headlong into love. Blake shared stories of his childhood on a farm in Kansas, of his dreams to build something that would last beyond his lifetime. "I want Emma to inherit this land someday," he told Hannah as they walked along the creek that bordered the western edge of the property. "For it to be as much hers as if she'd been born a Barton." Hannah's heart swelled at his words. "You've already given us so much." Blake stopped walking, turning to face her. "I want to give you my name too, if you'll have it." The proposal was simple and direct, like the man himself. Hannah searched his face, seeing nothing but sincerity and love. "Are you asking me to marry you, Blake Barton?" He took her hands in his. "I am. I love you, Hannah. I think I've loved you since that night I found you in the snow, ready to sacrifice everything for your daughter. I want to build a life with you both, more children if you want them. A family." Hannah thought about the woman she had been that winter night, desperate, hopeless, willing to give up her child rather than watch her starve. And she thought about the woman she was now, stronger, hopeful, loved. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I'll marry you." Blake's smile outshone the summer sun as he pulled her into his arms, his kiss a promise of all the years to come. They were married in September, a small ceremony in the garden Hannah had planted. Emma, dressed in a gown Blake had ordered specially from Denver, was passed between Hank and the pastor's wife during the short service. As Hannah and Blake exchanged vows beneath an arch of late-blooming wildflowers, Hannah couldn't help but think of how close she had come to walking away that night from Emma, from the possibility of happiness, from life itself. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the pastor declared, and Blake's kiss sealed their covenant before God and the small gathering of friends. The celebration afterward was simple but joyful. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard, Blake found Hannah sitting on the porch steps, watching Emma play with a wooden toy horse Hank had carved. "Happy, Mrs. Barton?" Blake asked, settling beside her. Hannah leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "More than I ever thought possible." "You know," Blake said thoughtfully, "someday we should tell Emma the story of how we met, how her stubborn mother tried to leave her on church steps, and how her even more stubborn father refused to let either of you go." Hannah smiled, watching Emma's determined little face as she concentrated on her toy. "I think she already knows how stubborn we both are." Blake's arm tightened around her shoulders. "I thank God every day that I was in town that night that I found you both." "So do I," Hannah whispered. "So do I." 5 years later, on a crisp autumn day much like their wedding day, Hannah stood on the porch of the Barton Ranch, watching Blake teaching Emma to ride her new pony. At 6 years old, Emma was fearless, her laughter carrying across the yard as Blake led the gentle mare in a circle. Hannah's hand rested on her swollen belly, where their second child, a boy, if Hank's predictions were to be believed, kicked vigorously. Their first son, Thomas, named for the father Emma would never know, played at her feet with wooden blocks Blake had carved during the long winter evenings. The ranch had prospered under their joint care. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, and Blake had hired more hands to manage the increasing herd of cattle. Hannah's vegetable garden now supplied not only their table but also the general store in town, providing a steady income of her own that gave her a sense of pride and independence. As she watched her husband and daughter, Hannah thought about the path that had led her here, the grief and desperation, the moment of deepest despair when she had been ready to give up everything, and the miracle of a stranger's kindness that had changed the course of her life. Blake looked up, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, even after 5 years of marriage, still made her heart skip a beat. He whispered something to Emma, who nodded excitedly, and then they were both riding toward her, Emma proudly sitting tall in her small saddle. "Mama," Emma called. "Papa says I'm the best rider he's ever seen." "Better than your papa?" Hannah asked, smiling at Blake's pretend indignation. "Well, almost as good," Blake amended, dismounting to lift Emma from her pony. "She's a natural, just like her mother." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "I believe you're the one who taught me to ride, Mr. Barton." Blake set Emma down and came to stand beside Hannah, his hand joining hers on her belly. "And you're a quick study, Mrs. Barton." Their eyes met in shared understanding of all they had overcome together, of the precious life they had built from the ashes of Hannah's despair. "I was thinking," Blake said, his voice low enough that only Hannah could hear, "that we might name this one Hope, boy or girl." Hannah leaned into his embrace, watching Emma show her little brother how her pony's mane felt like silk. "Hope," she repeated softly. "It suits us, doesn't it?" Blake pressed a kiss to her temple. "It's what you gave me the night you stayed. What I tried to give you when I found you on those church steps." Hannah turned in his arms, her heart full to bursting with gratitude for this man who had saved not just her life, but her soul. "You gave me so much more than hope, Blake Barton. You gave us a future." As the sun set behind the mountains they both loved, casting golden light across the ranch they had built together, Hannah knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be in the arms of the cowboy who had refused to let her leave anything behind.